Takta, which is, of course, Kurdish, as James knew, for Achtung, Achtung. The Kurds actually played a small part in World War II with an insurrection in Iraq in 1943. Did you know that?
Yeah.
Of course you did.
Well, I thought it was 1941, actually.
Oh, well, probably both.
Yeah.
Anyway, the poor old Kurds, they're always the bottom of the pile. Anyway,
well, there was certainly quite a lot going on in 1941 because the Germans were trying to sort of
stir Iraq
up, and the British went in and sorted them out.
Anyway, that just shows, of course, what a truly global conflict this was. Now, dear listener, we've been taking note of your comments, and we've decided to have a small experiment. From this week, We Have Ways of Making You Talk is moving to twice weekly. So you get your usual show on a Tuesday morning full of wild claims about General Gavin and Russian tank blunders. Plus,
and oh my God, General Gavin, that's really got everyone going, hasn't
I know,
it?
But you know what? The thing is I think Rob Pulliser he makes a perfectly good case.
Yeah.
It's all there in the documentary evidence. It also certainly fits what happened. I mean, this is the really interesting thing about it. Isn't it? It's yet another one of those explanations that arguably explains what happens rather than the received view.
Yeah.
And yet people they just can't get their heads around it.
But General Gavin is
cool,
holier than thou. I mean, you can't badmouth him. That's just us being jingoistic and pro-British and not pro-American.
Then why didn't he take the bloody bridge? So anyway, so James has sorted out this week's extra episode while on a trip to Italy. So basically what we're doing is a Tuesday episode and a Thursday episode in which we'll annoy a whole new set of people or rile you afresh. So James, tell us a bit about Monte Sole.
Yes, well, you may remember that we touched on this on kind of one of our early podcasts, I think it was. We were talking about sort of forgotten things, weren't we?
Yeah.
And I was mentioning this huge massacre of 770 plus people that were killed. And it was the biggest civilian massacre in Western Europe. You know, bigger than Orador, bigger than Medici outside Prague. And I happened to be over there in the Gothic line last week, and I went back up to Monte Sole with a few people. And we suddenly realised it was the 75th anniversary to the day.
Really?
Yes, it was absolutely amazing. I just, when I've been planning the trip, I just hadn't put two and two together. And then literally the day before, we suddenly went, oh my God, tomorrow's the 29th.
Right.
That is the day. And so we went back up there, and it was, it was a beautiful day. It was absolutely stunning. And there was a bit going on, but not that much.
Yeah.
There was a service at one of the kind of ruined villages, a place called San Martino, in the evening. There was quite a lot of people there for that. But generally you could just, walk up to these massacre sites, and there was sort of a few people around, but mainly they seemed to be sort of mountain biking and walking with absolutely no awareness of what had happened. I mean, I've got to say, the people I was with, again, had never heard of it before.
Well, it's not on people's map, is it?
It just isn't. And they were literally dumbfounded. I mean, you could see their mouths just open.
But
as I was telling them, I was explaining what was going on and what happened.
But this is indicative of I mean, because we've talked an awful lot about Northwestern Europe, and after all, we went to Arnhem. We went to talk about this 9-day battle in Northwestern Europe. That is one of the, I suppose you could use the word most glamorous events of the autumn campaign. Certainly the one that's argued over the most, and the toss is argued over and over again. And the Italian campaign just isn't on people's radars.
No.
And yet it's easily as dramatic. It's as important, because it's, after all, it's about running the Germans down, attriting them wherever you can find them, which is the thing we've talked about all the way since we started, since episode 1. We've talked about how that's what the Allies are trying to do, and yet it's just not on people simply aren't aware of it. And like you say, bigger massacre than Orador, bigger atrocity than.
What's the most amazing thing is that the partisan band was that was it. The Stella Rossa, which was one of the most effective partisan bands within the kind of partisan organisation. Particularly in that summer of 1944. I mean, Kesselring reckoned that just between June and August alone, 5,000 German soldiers have been killed and a further 30,000, wounded or kidnapped or whatever. I mean, that's a heck of a lot. That's well over. I mean, that's three German divisions by 1944 standards.
Yeah. And we've talked a lot about the French resistance and how effective or not they had been, and how obviously they basically got their skirts up in 1944 when the tide had turned. But that's going on in Italy.
That's a heck of a lot of people.
Well, no, that's. I mean, just in terms of in terms of the people affected, but how many men were tied up dealing with it?
Exactly.
And how effective that is as a...
Well, the Stella Rossa are really interesting because there's sort of a whole load of different partisan bands, and lots of them are kind of way behind. There's a lot in the Alps, for example, in the foothills of the Alps, and they're kind of attacking, German supply lines and all the rest of it, and really having scraps mostly with the GNR, which is the kind of sort of fascist Republican militia.
Yeah,
the black shirts.
Because there's the rump, isn't there, of the Italian rump government that Mussolini's.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly. The RSI, the Italian Socialist Republic, as it's supposed so called, but it is absolutely a puppet government.
Yeah,
and they're also attacking kind of SS police battalions, who in northern Italy are mostly Italians.
Yeah,
in those SS police battalions.
Yeah,
some 250,000 people kind of join either the GNR or the police battalions or the new divisions or whatever. So it's quite a lot.
Yeah.
But where they're most effective is just behind the front, and the Stella Rossa are just behind they're on the Gothic line, really. Yeah. They're just south of Bologna in the mountains there. And either side of the Monte Sole Massif is these two river valleys, the Seta and the Reno. And the Seta has got a railway line and a road, and the Reno has got, so obviously, that is your key axis for the Germans' point of view.
So therefore,
going back
extremely vulnerable.
Yeah, and it's just, it's completely intolerable for the Germans to have this really pretty effective and large partisan band operating in the back. Now, what happens on the rastrellamento, the clean-up operation to clear the Stella Rossa, is the Stella Rossa is completely finished because they do capture most of their arms, printing press, machine guns, everything they need to operate as partisans. But very, very few get killed. Somewhere between 7 and 20 are killed. So the vast majority of those killed are civilians, and the reason is that the civilians don't think they're going to be killed.
Right.
They think that when the Germans are launching this clean-up operation,
they're just going to come for the partisans.
They're going to come for the partisans. So all the young men and sort of middle-aged men, they all go to the top of the hill. They all disperse. There are firefights with partisans, but they're able to disperse because they prepared this. Yeah. They prepared for such an eventuality. Go to the top of Monte Salvaro, go to the top of Monte Sole. And, when you're walking around this area, it's very kind of wooded, lots of small oaks and that kind of stuff, and aspens and chestnuts and stuff like that. And, of course, there's a network of little paths and tracks and footpaths and so on, and animal tracks that the partisans know intimately.
Yeah.
And if you're German, you've just moved into line kind of, a week before, and this is your first time on this ground, you're simply not going to know that ground. So the partisan who's escaping has an unbelievable advantage. I mean, if you're at the top of Monte Salvaro, which is a big old peak, there's just simply no way as a German you're going to stagger up there not knowing where the hell you are.
Yeah.
When the partisans
So rather than fight the partisans, track them down, they punitively take out the communities. Because after all, the partisans are reliant on the communities. They need villages, they need places, they need food to subsist and all that sort of thing, and sustenance.
Absolutely. And what the Germans do, they just kill everything. I mean, they destroy everything. They burn all the roofs and buildings. They take all the food. They take all the supplies. That mountain community, which has been in exactly that same way for centuries, just ceases to exist.
So it's completely scorched earth, and
totally.
And they're basically it's as if they, rather than behead the insurgency, they chop its body off.
Exactly. That's a really good way of putting it. That's exactly what happens. And of course, at the end of that operation, they haven't got a problem anymore.
Yeah.
Those partisans have just gone spread to the four winds. Some of them have gone back to the Allied lines. Yeah. They end up fighting in Fifth Army in the final battle as sort of, Italian battalions. Yeah. Others go north and join other partisan bands. So they're not completely hors de combat. But the problem immediately behind the line that the Germans are facing
has gone.
Now,
Stella Rossa. Yeah, I remember you saying before that they're not necessarily left wing.
No, that's great irony because of course it's a red star.
It's a red star, but they're not because after all you've got, and this is part of the end of the Second World War problem for the British government. Certainly, is this what the hell do we do? There's communists in Yugoslavia. There's communists in Greece. There's communists popping up all over, and in France and in Italy. But these people aren't communists.
No, not at all. Well, so there are some. Okay, so what happens is immediately after the armistice, there are these 6 clandestine political parties that have been in existence but on the sly ever since 1922 in the rise of fascism. So what happens on the 9th of September is these 6 parties, which stretch from the kind of extreme right wing to the communists and obviously extreme left wing, get together and they go, okay, let's form ourselves into a committee of national liberation. Let's agree to put our political differences aside for national unity and try and form a new political movement that gets democracy back on track.
Right.
And that happens, and they get supported by the Allies as the Allies push forward. And there is agreement made that the king will abdicate and abdicate his powers, and that they will form a government. And actually, Ivan Bonomi, who is the previous prime minister from 1922, becomes prime minister of the unoccupied, non-German allied bit of Italy. So there is a thing called AMGOT, which is Allied Military Government of Occupied Territories, which they then take away the GOT bit, and it just becomes Allied Military Government. There's a sort of buffer where they're immediately behind the front where they're organising things. Yeah. And then as they progress north, large tracts of territory get handed back over to the democratic, in inverted commas, combined party, national unity government of these 6 parties, of which Bonomo is the prime minister. What they then do is they then establish the CNLAI, the Committee of National Liberation in the north, in Milan, again, clandestinely, in
anticipation of the liberation.
Yes, but also to try and coordinate the partisan operations. And they also create the Corps of Volunteers of Liberation, the CVL, and out of that becomes this sort of political. And what they're trying to do is trying to organise the partisans, and they send in political commissars to try and sort of, which is a bit like the kind of sort of Russian way of doing things. And they tend to be either from the kind of Action Party or the Communist Party, both of which are very much on the left-wing side of things. Yeah. Now, Mario Mussolesi, who is the commander of the Stella Rossa, who's known as, his nom de guerre is Lupo, the wolf, is very against this. And he's very against having commissars. And he doesn't like it. He just says, look, there should be only one politics, and that's to get rid of the Nazi fascists. Right. Politics is for later. Let's not worry about it. Let's not cloud after, because it'll only lead to infighting. Let's just not bother with it. Let's just all agree.
He's a very smart individual.
Yeah, he's absolutely bang on.
He's exactly right, yeah.
But unfortunately, particularly in August, there's a whole load of arms drops which don't successfully reach them, that the Germans intercept. And they're a bit short. And the unified command is saying, we'll give you some supplies if you have the political commissars. So Lippe goes, okay, fine. Okay, you can have the political commissars, and they've got a communist one and they've got an Action Party one. But I want you to kind of really not be too politically overt. Right. And there's a kind of sort of agreement that is made. And he's clearly a really charismatic figure. He's 30 years old. He looks a lot younger. He's got, dark wavy hair. He's not very hirsute. Yeah. But he's got this charisma. He's got natural leadership tendencies. And he is the master. I mean, he really, really nails it. The problem is that the person he answers to is this OSS agent called Lino Rocco, who's he's an Italian. Yeah. He's working for the OSS. And Lino is saying, actually, what we want you to do is start mustering here on Monte Sole Massif. And the partisans work really effectively by spreading to 4 winds, having little companies all over the place. So that, if there is a Rastrellamento, you can't kind of... But what he does is he brings it all back onto Monte Sole because Lino Rocco from the OSS is saying it's really important that when the Allies come through, you hold that ground. The last thing we want is the Germans on top of the Monte Sole Massif, high point, having another Monte Cassino overlooking not just the Liri Valley, as it was the case in Monte Cassino, but both the Reno and the Seta Valley. So you've got to stay there. And everyone's going, oh, Lupo, this is
not really how we work.
This is not great. This is not how we work. And he goes, don't worry, trust me, the Allies will be here. You can hear the guns. They're only kind of 12 miles to the south. So it's within touching distance, and he's really confident. And he's intercepted these letters that suggest that the German morale is absolutely shot. But of course, as we know, that doesn't really matter because
Germans have got different ways of doing things.
Yeah, and also, it doesn't matter whether their morale is shot. The bottom line is, if they don't stay and fight, they're going to be shot. So, it's so it's a perfect storm, really.
And what happens to him, Il Lupo?
Well, if I tell you now, then it's going to spoil it for the podcast.
Okay, more of that later this week, because we've split the thing in two. Do you see how it works? Right, so now, James, before we begin in earnest, though, a couple of pieces of correspondence. Jimmy Gregory got in touch to say, another We Have Ways podcast, keeping me going through another sleepless 24 hours on the Labour ward. Going to make sure our daughter comes out a fully fledged military historian. Who needs caffeine? We've got World War II talk.
Yeah.
Good luck, Jimmy and family. We've also had some correspondence about James's superb reading of our recent
I have a bit
sponsor
embarrassed
message.
about this, I don't mind telling you.
You may recall poor old James was required to work deep into the night while in Nijmegen with some unexpected results. Steve Marley got in touch with some splendid advice. Hi, James. You have to listen to your Beer 52 intro at half speed. You'll see what I mean if you do. Loving the podcast. Hashtag we have ways. Well, let's have a listen. Give it a go. We've got it here.
How does the offer of a free case of craft beer sound to you? All you need to do is go to beer52.com/talk and cover the cost of postage. It's a mere £4.95 to receive 8 free beers.
Well, of course, I was very, very drunk at the time. That's absolutely brilliant. That's so funny.
Superb. Right, well, it's time for a short break. I've got a load of those beers in the fridge. Should we do?
Well, I don't think I better.
Crack a few and do part two. Here's a belting question from listener Philip, which we'll answer when we return. Loving the podcast. Hashtag we have ways. Informative, passionate, and funny. Just amazing. I couldn't agree more. Just wondered, when are you going to answer the last burning question of World War II? Why is there a T-34 parked on the old Kent Road? Hold that thought. See you in a tick. Welcome back to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. Before the break, I read out Philip's question about the reason for the presence of a T-34, which, by the way, is a Russian World War II tank. I mean, you're listening to this podcast, you know what a T-34 is. Honestly. On the Old Kent Road in London. James, do you know about this tank?
Well, I have to say I didn't. The only thing I knew about the Old Kent Road was that there was a guy called John Gillard who used to restore and sell very old Citroens. And actually, that's where I bought mine from back in the day. But apparently, the tank is called Stompy.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's an old Soviet tank, and it's understood to have been involved in the Prague uprising, the Spring uprising.
Right.
But apparently it was brought into the UK in 1995 for the film of Richard III, which was
Ian McKellen. Ian McKellen,
one,
where it's
yeah.
a sort of they're sort of paramilitary,
sort of fascist kind of Nazi kind of thing,
black shirt, Richard
exactly
III,
that,
yeah, with tanks and stuff.
And as often is the way with these things, that you kind of finish the film, you don't need that anymore. I mean, does Ian McKellen really need a T-34? Probably not.
Well, I don't know.
So he then sells it to a local businessman. And was given permission by the council to put it up.
Because it gets a different paint job every now and again. Because if you look it up if you do Google it, you'll see it's had psychedelic paint jobs, and it's had sort of all sorts of spiral paint jobs and all this sort of thing. And I think it gets sort of spruced up every few years. And it's I mean, when you end up down there and you say, oh yeah, it's a T-34. It's a T-34-86 as well, I believe.
Okay.
So it's the one with the Tiger Buster.
Nice.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think the council knew that it was a T-34 tank? I mean, do you think they just said tank?
It could
have been a water tank, septic tank,
yeah,
whatever.
maybe. I mean, the thing is with that is that's one of those sort of landmarks. If you tried to get rid of it, if you tried to put one in now, if I tried to park a Sherman tank at the end of this road,
there'd be problems.
There'd be big problems. But you leave it there 15 years, and everyone's going, you can't get rid of our Sherman tank. What are you doing?
We love our Sherman tank.
We love our Sherman tank.
Actually, I was with a guy on Thursday who has just bought a T-34 and he got it up and running.
Really?
And guess what? It's going to be at Chalk Valley History Festival
Shut
next
up!
June.
Really?
Yeah, and we can play on it and we can have a go
What's
in it.
What's its provenance? What do you know about it?
I don't know its provenance, but I know it's served.
Running.
It's served. It's World War II. And he'd make the point because he was saying it's got number 170 stamped on it. And he thought, oh, okay, that's really rare. And then they went, no, that's the mark for that month.
Bloody hell.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's probably good. Anyway,
Tankergrad,
it's being, Tankergrad. So anyways, it's being done up in Oxford at the moment. It's going to be coming back down to Wiltshire in the new year. And then it's kind of, let's come and have a play. So we can go down to it and have a look at it.
Put synchro mesh on it. That's all
we
I'm
can
gonna
actually
say.
go down and have a play with it before the History Festival. We can play in the new year.
I have driven one.
Have you?
A long time ago.
Okay. They're pretty simple?
They're very simple. In fact, I mean, there's the whole thing. You need a hammer to put it in gear and all that stuff.
Do you?
Yes, you did need.
You really did.
I did need to hit the gear lever with a hammer to get it into first. Yes.
Really
grind it in.
Yeah.
But you get it's not. The thing is it's not designed for an Oxford graduate.
No, it's designed for a very... I mean, are we going to be able to get in it? I mean, that's the point. I mean, because they're designed for... Because I think if you were more than kind of 5'6",
no,
you couldn't be in it.
It was pretty... I mean, I had to have the hatch open. I couldn't be in there with the hatch closed.
Right.
It's certainly a lot less roomy than a Sherman, for instance. And they're not roomy.
No.
We're both tall.
Yeah.
And it's pretty grisly being in those. Anyway, so you've
But
a
anyway,
question.
so
You've
that's
a
really
question.
exciting. And we're going to, I think with Chalk Valley, the idea is to get a female tank crew.
I think this is officially our first mention of the Chalk Valley History Festival.
It won't be
we're
the last.
9 months out?
It won't be the last.
I mean,
oh my
since
God.
the last one of next year of the 2020 Chalk Valley History Festival.
Big plans. I'm having a whole... Okay, I've just agreed this week. We're going to have... We have these sort of specials at the Chalk Valley History Festival, and this sort of, satisfies me, whilst at the same time not annoying all the kind of punters that don't want kind of wall-to-wall World War II during their history festival. So we're going to have a 1940 day, which will be as you'll buy a ticket and that'll give you access to every single talk and thing that we do. And we'll do that, I think, on the Thursday of the history festival. Then on the Friday we're going to have a 1945 day.
Oh,
and then there'll be stuff going on all over the weekend. We're going to have we're going to have a light aid detachment. So we're going to be doing up a Cromwell tank all week.
Oh, amazing. Did you see World on Fire, by the way?
No, I haven't. I've downloaded it. I can't wait.
Okay.
Yes,
I won't say a word. But the only thing that struck me is, you were talking about anniversaries in part one.
Yes.
Like that it was the 75th of Monte Sole. 17th of September, right?
Yep.
Isn't just the 75th anniversary of Arnhem. It's the 80th anniversary of the Soviet Union invading Poland. That was the day that the Soviet Union took its chunk of Poland.
Yes.
And moved in.
Yeah.
And I mean, the interesting thing about World on Fire, and of course all the stuff we've talked about before, is that the Soviet Union giving basically Germany a free pass and then invading Poland and then setting about destroying Poland in the same way that the Germans did. It doesn't come up in World on Fire. That's all I'm saying. But it's just interesting that that's the anniversary.
Yes.
That the 17th of September isn't just Arnhem.
Oh my God! And we just completely
passed
So
it.
we're falling.
It whistled overhead.
Yeah, which is bad because we're then sort of conforming to type and doing what everyone else did.
Yep. Which we're trying to not do, aren't we?
1 in 4 Poles killed in the Second World War.
What?
1 in 4 Poles killed.
Full stop.
Full stop. I mean, that is just...
So you could argue that the Second World War happened in Poland more than anywhere else.
It affected Poland. It affected Polish people more than any other nation.
Its happenings are in Poland because it starts there. The Holocaust happens there, which is the sort of signature event of war aim of the Nazis, and then the Soviet pushback happens there as well, and the establishment of the Eastern Bloc and the post-war status quo. So it's Poland more than any other country that is where World War II goes down, as it were.
So, and compared to that, Britain is 1 in 88, something like that.
Yeah. 1 in 4.
1 in 4 to 1 in 88.
Anyway, you have a question.
Yes, I've got a question. Okay, and I know you
digressed
think
there, and heavens, but there we go.
That's quite a big one. I mean, that's quite a good point. I mean, you always make the point that only old people use email, but actually, this is from a youngster.
Oh, right, okay.
This is Oscar
What, they're in their early
Baldwin.
70s?
Mind you, it is being sent through by his dad.
Oh, well, there we go.
His dad, Glenn. Now, Oscar's question is, do you think that Alan Brooke's contribution is overlooked? And if so, is this due to a weak media image? That's a very good question.
I don't know if is Oscar, is it?
Oscar, yeah.
I don't know if he's
Oscar Baldwin.
I don't know if he's seen Game of Thrones, right?
Yeah.
And this isn't really a spoiler, but at the end of Game of Thrones, the official history of what happens in Game of Thrones gets written up. And Tyrion Lannister, who has been a major character throughout the show, in fact, the central character, arguably, who's been central to all the events, has made important decisions, strategic, tactical, top to bottom, cultural decisions. He's possibly the most important character in the whole thing. They present him to the official history, and he's not in it. And that's Alan Brooke. Alan Brooke is Tyrion Lannister. But the point of Alan Brooke, the point of a guy like that is they don't get in. He wasn't interested in having a media profile.
No.
Was he? Because he wasn't that kind. He wasn't that kind of leader. Monty knew he had to have a media profile.
Yeah, but as did all the senior
as did all the senior field commanders.
Yes.
The kind of because Brooke is essentially the ultimate backroom guy.
Yeah. Well, and Marshall's the same, and I would say that Marshall's in the same category, really.
Yeah.
Marshall was desperate to be Supreme Allied Commander in ETO.
Yeah.
He has to take that on the chin when Roosevelt says, well, I think Eisenhower's really the man.
Who
is Marshall's protege?
Well, because he wanted Marshall in Washington, because
of course,
because he said, I need you.
So I think actually
here.
the two are quite the
similar.
paths are quite similar. And Brooke is very much a kind of not to blow his own trumpet kind of person. Yeah. I remember coming across this amazing. I do think to a certain extent Monty is an exception in the British rule. I remember Giles Lampson, who is Miles Lampson's son, who was the ambassador to Cairo.
Yeah.
British ambassador to Cairo. Giles Lampson is a British aide to Mark Clark. And he says, it's just extraordinary, all these American generals. The press come round and they have to be photographed only on a certain angle. Clark famously would only be photographed from one side. He'd always take his helmet on and put his field cap on, before he had a photo taken. And he said, they all absolutely obsess over their scrapbooks. All of them have scrapbooks. And he wasn't singling out Clark at all. Yeah. And he was saying, personally, I find it all a bit kind of, a bit distasteful. But on the other hand, if that's what it takes to keep keep the front in the American public eye, then I guess that's what you have to do. And it's absolutely the case that you do. In the case of Mark Clark, what he's trying to do is he knows that Italy is a secondary theatre. He's desperate to keep it. He's got to pump it up, and he's the figurehead of that. He's the leading man, and having a big personality leading it, and someone who's photographed a lot, that's all.
Whereas Brooke's interested in bird spotting and
and looking hawkish, but it's just. First of all, it's just not part of the British DNA. I mean, Dempsey's not a self-publicist. No. Alexander's not a self-publicist.
No.
Monty is, because he kind of gets it in a way that the other British field commanders are kind of sort of catching up. Slim gets it.
Yeah.
Slim gets it completely. Mountbatten gets it. So Monty's not alone, but they are kind of rare, I think. Whereas the Americans is absolutely just part of what they do. But Brooke, as you say, he's not a field commander. He's kind of pushing strings. It's just not in his nature to want to push himself forward. But secondly, it's just not necessary.
Yeah.
That's not what it's about. And these guys, their sense of honour and duty, this is something that is absolutely inbuilt into their DNA as officers in the British Army.
Yeah.
It still is to a certain extent. But absolutely was.
But do you also think, could it be, this again is part of First World War legacy, is that generals, not the First World War legacy, but interpretation of the First World War that happens in the 30s, the 20s and the 30s, that after Lloyd George saying that the generals are incompetent, and if only they'd listened to him, the war would have ended sooner, and all that politician stuff that went on after the First World War. Because, you get basically Haig going from being someone people revered, basically, to someone whose name was mud.
Yeah.
And that happens quite quickly in the late 20s and 30s, sort of mutates into disgust at generals.
Yes.
So
because Haig's a complete hero to start with.
Yeah, Haig is a complete hero to start with. And so maybe part of it, that is a kind of cultural expression of the fact that generals have got a bad name for themselves. So what you don't want to do as a general is put your head above the figurative parapet, as it were.
I've never thought of that. That's a really good point.
Maybe that's part of it, because after all, Monty rubs as many people. I mean, a lot of the reason why people don't like Monty is precisely because he did court publicity, and he rubbed an awful lot of people up the wrong way who felt he shouldn't be doing
shooting
that.
a line. It's sort of a bit in for a dig.
Exactly, and you do, which is a very, very British way of putting it, infradig. It's got to be modest.
I wrote that in my Normandy book, and the US editor came back and just said, "That's not a phrase that we understand in America." It's like, you don't understand the irony of that.
But maybe that's it. But then because Brooke is a figure that has emerged in the literature, isn't he? His diaries get published and all that sort of thing.
Yes, and I think actually his reputation is pretty good.
No, his reputation. He has an excellent reputation. In fact, now, but he sort of didn't exist before. His reputation was kind of not resurrected because it hadn't died. Anyway, well, that's it for today, folks. We hope, Oscar, that answers your question. Basically, he's Tyrion Lannister. Remember, we've got an extra edition of the pod on Thursdays. James visits Italy to retell a brutal story. Keep your comments and questions coming using the Twitter hashtag #WeHaveWays or by email if you're ancient or very young, as it turns out. It's either kids or pensioners who use the email. WeHaveWays podcast@gmail.com.
Yep, see you all soon. Cheerio.
Cheerio.